if you go out and you learn about like the historical aspects of like either how your town or how your nation came to be, and what were the laws and the policies structured into society to make sure that these paradigms that you're talking about were created and were enforced on our people. Because learning this, I understood why, our great grandmother and my grandmother, and society had a paradigm or a vision about like people, classes, hierarchies, right? Caste systems, and how were they portrayed on television and movies and radio stations and talk shows and newspapers and comic books. And it all comes down to, the historical aspect of it and what were the laws and policies established to make them so. And when you are explaining that now, say to your relatives, family members, or even friends about, then a lot of these paradigms are breaking in front of them because they can now, you have taken, right, dirt out of their eyes and explain to them, like, why it is that we grew up thinking a certain way.
So Aztlán, you are definitely a personality to watch out for, but not in a bad way, really. It's someone that I want to see your growth, your evolution, because I think you're going to be one of those personalities that I'm going to be talking to my students and be like, hey, you have someone that you can look up to. If you were to talk to one of my students, how would you tell them that it started for you?
Okay. I think something that's very important is understanding that of when you first started walking or you first started heading in a direction, is understanding where you were and how that came to be, right? So for most of us, it has to do a lot with our upbringing, right? Our upbringing, what it was, what was the nature of it, and what was the realization that maybe the way we grew up or the path that we were on was maybe not the right one, or just something that was very different than the overall path that you wanted to conclude in your life, if that makes sense. So for me, obviously, it comes to two things, having my parents that were immigrants from Mexico, and at the same time being raised by my grandparents and not my parents in Mexico City, even though I was born here in Anaheim, right? So for a lot of us that have immigrant parents to come into a different nation with a different culture, that's more dominant than the one your parents can contribute. You do find yourself in a place where there's a confusion of who are you supposed to be really? Do you portray more your parents, or are you able to assimilate per se to a culture that you don't fully grasp, right? Having said that, being raised by my grandparents until I was about 10 years old in Mexico City, and partaking in that culture and understanding perspective, to then later on being brought back to the United States and just being culture shocked, that left a very everlasting impact on myself of like, who am I really? What am I to do? And then if you add the difficult upbringing that I had, especially with my parents, our dynamics was a very unstable. It was a very unstable and a very unforgiving environment, if I can say that. Then I grew up with a lot of resentment, a lot of confusion. And what helped me with all that is getting to know me for the first time, when I was about 20 years old. Visiting my great grandmother who was still alive, getting to know her, and understanding that she, like myself, are connected to a multi-millennial heritage that I was completely blinded to, that I came to a realization that society made it a point for us to forget where we come from, who we are, what our value is more than anything. And that is the reason why a lot of people find it important enough to fight, for their heritage or their culture, is because the value that they perceived was missing growing up, they understood that has always been there. As long as you reach out and you grasp a hold of it, right? And so I would want to say to your students that the way I found my path is by understanding the importance of who we are, who the people were behind us, and why it's important to always remember them, remember their customs, their culture, and why it's also important to be proud of it, and display it in our present day today.
Yes, I can visualize everything. And as someone that I made my great grandmother, she passed away of 105. I can relate to that idea of connecting with our values and our ancestors. But could you give me more information about your great grandmother?
I mean, it was magical, getting to know that world that I was unfamiliar with. I'm like 20 years old. I'm getting my ticket to go to a place I've never even been to. Paso de Arena, Guerrero, the state of Guerrero, a small community known as Paso de Arena. And that was like 5 hours south of Mexico City. And just, being taken by an uncle that from Mexico City to Paso de Arena, Guerrero. And once getting there, it was like a place that was like stuck in the 1950s, the males, wore their cowboy boots and hats, and the females were very beautiful with their dresses. It was very charming, very pleasant, and the people there were a true community. 1,000%. They all knew each other. They all knew the role that they were supposed to be playing, and getting to know my great grandmother was very special for me, because I was talking to a walking history book. I was in front of somebody that had been born in 1907, was there through the 1910s, 20s, 30s, 40s, and I would ask her questions just to I would ask her questions from like the history books that I grew up reading, just to see what her take is. And the fact that she lived them, that was like groundbreaking for me, And at that moment, I realized that we really don't know like much, or we don't know as much as we think we do.
Mm-hmm. What details would you add about your grandma that added to that time period?
I mean, the fact that she was alive, she was a little girl during the Mexican Revolution. I mean, for me, that's hardcore.
Yeah.
Because, she remember that there was turmoil, that, life was changing, and especially for those people at the time, it was very scary. The world evolving right in front of your eyes, and not even understanding what that's going to look like 100 years later. You understand what I'm saying? Is like 100 years later for a random great-grandchild coming from the United States to meet you. I mean, that made me realize, like, here I am making my own story now. And my legacy is starting here in the United States. You understand? It's like I have my own world. And for these two worlds to meet, for me, that was very hardcore, to be honest. Yeah.
That is hardcore.
It was awesome. It's just like, I jumped back into like a chapter in the history books, meeting her, for sure.
I think that the times of today, we actually are living those times now. Yep. That we are going to be part of the history book. What feelings do you get comparing and contrasting both times?
Well, pound for pound, the one thing that I can definitely take away, at least from her, is admiration from her, because meeting her was very empowering. And being able to look at a woman that has been through things I couldn't even imagine, her resilience, her strength, Just the fact that she was very lively and brightly at her age, 103 years old when I met her, um, made me realize that like she lived a thorough life, but at the same time, a lot of life of strength, a life of resilience, and I feel like I have inherited that. And so I'm very grateful um, for seeing that similarity, and that is what I feel I need to preserve in my life for the revolutions, the evolutions, and some of the challenges that my life is about to face or has faced. And just the way she survived, I hope I can, if I ever reach that age, I mean, that would be a miracle. But even so, like, I also want to live a thorough life, just like her, with the same resilience and the same, courage that she did.
How did she look like? Do you have pictures of
Yeah, I
her?
do.
You do?
Yeah. So you see pictures of her as a young woman, and she looks like a young woman. She looks like, like a. I mean, not to say that she wasn't a normal person when I met her, but when I met her, I mean, everybody had a very cute nickname for her. They called her La Guayabita, the little guava, because she was so little, and she was so little and lively. Like, you get in her while she's walking through her house, like, you get in her way, she'll smack the crap out of you. Just get out the way, and they'll call her the little guava. She was so cute. She was amazing. I have pictures of her when I was like 20 with my cousin from Mexico City. That she also never met her, and for us it was just like life changing.
What do you think we should be doing so we can continue preserving those stories and the acknowledgement that we come from very strong and resilient people? How do we keep that alive in the forefront, and specifically during these times now, and who knows what is to come in the future? How do we preserve that?
Yeah. Well, very importantly, number one thing is to always remember them. Always remember them and keep them in mind when we're living our lives, when we're making very important decisions, is always remember, your ancestors and the people that came before you, of the way they lived their life, the things that they did for the reasons that they did that. Always keeping them in mind and remembering remembering them and remembering their legacy is gonna make that fire exist. Number one, and number two, not just remembering them, but talking about them, talking to them, talking to talking about my great grandmother to my brothers, my siblings, my sisters, my uncles, my nephews, my nieces. Hey, our great grandmother Porfiria Reyes, she was like this, she said that, she was funny, it was amazing meeting her, and then that instills their curiosity. So maybe some of the questions that they have that I might not be able to answer, hopefully one day they might be able to search the answers themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
So remembering them, talking about them, and now more importantly that a lot of people like you and myself are doing is actually recreating or redoing the customs, the cultures, a lot of the actions, a lot of the clothing that they were, like instilling in that in our lives, so that we continue to preserve their memory and their legacy.
I'm glad that you said that because that was going to be something I wanted to ask you. Is like, how are you preserving those customs and traditions and ways of being? Because, for example, I feel the way my parents feel. I feel it's so contradicting. I feel orphan.
Right.
I feel like an orphan not because I don't have parents. My parents are alive and very well, thank you.
Right.
But I feel that that feeling of feeling orphan is because I don't have that connection with my traditions and the things that of those stories that all great, abuelita, ta did this and did that. Well, like, good, yes. But I kind of wish I could be doing it and continuing that. How did you get connected back to that, and how do you bring that forward where your your family that is the new generation can see that and be like, I want to do that. I want to continue with that.
Right. So I feel what you're feeling, and I feel like a lot of the people that had the same upbringing of not understanding what our connection was to our past, or not having a clear perspective. For those that actually grew up with their grandparents, or grew up, with the rich culture that they were present in, they can definitely value it, right? But a lot of us that were maybe didn't have that connection as much. Number one, I feel, is that you do have to understand that there are people around us that are continuing to live truthfully and their traditions or their culture, whether it be here, in the United States, or in Mexico. So why do I say this? Because it's for me, finding out in 2016, 6 years later after meeting my great grandmother, that there was a collective that was teaching Nahuatl, like, the language of the Aztecs. For me, it was like, this is mind blowing, because who in the right mind, at first, this is like the initial thought in the first 10 seconds that I found this out, like on social media, that there was like this collective. It's like, who in their right mind would want to waste their time learning something that probably nobody speaks, right? That was like the initial thought that I had.
Mm-hmm.
But then the second thought is like, I want to know more about this collective. I want to know more about like how much progress have they made, or what is the nature of the language today. And to my surprise, I came to learn that 1.9 million indigenous native speakers still speak it. And some other people in this collective have actually gone out there and done summer camps with them, either in high school and college, and like lived among native speakers. So that was a different world that I had no clue existed,
Mm-hmm.
So to answer your question, how do we continue preserving these customs, or how can we continue to reconnect, is by, number one, understanding that there's already people doing the work, and that you can join certain communities. You can join certain, ceremonial circles, or collectives that are doing that. And when time permits, if people are able to travel maybe and try to reconnect, you're going to start rediscovering memories that you totally forgot you had. When you find, say, a lady fixing her mecate, while she's working, or doing some of the food, stuff, and they're using certain ollas, certain comales, you'll be like, hey, I remember some of this. And it's going to slowly start coming back to you,
You have mentioned in the past that you belong to this group of, and please forgive me, acronyms are like the worst for me. MMA, or what? The
Yeah, I mean, what, the MMA fighting team?
Oh yes, so the MMA fight. Oh, I did get it right.
Yeah.
True. How did you end up there, and what was the purpose? What was the force behind it that not only led you to seek that, but led you to stick with it?
I think it has a lot to do with when we're rediscovering, besides who we are, is who the people before us were, right? And one of those groups of people are the warriorhood, the people that were warriors, or that defended their nation, and say in our case, when you're talking about, like, say, Mesoamerican cultures, the nations of Semanahuac, the Mexica is probably the most studied nation. You learned about, the jaguar and the eagle warriors, and all these other warriors, groups. So for people like myself that, are martial artists, that we like martial arts, whether it be boxing, karate, MMA, mixed martial arts, that we have a longing for not necessarily for aggression, but for a certain type of discipline, when it comes to, like, martial arts. And when a friend of ours reaches out and he says, hey, I'm thinking of starting a training group with, with the Mesoamerican Foundation of, the Xochiyaoyotl, the flower wars. Anybody that has studied, our culture, understands what the flowery wars were, which was an agreed upon ritual combat event between opposing nations. I can get more into details with that, but overall, when this friend reached out and says he was thinking of making a training team with these Mesoamerican concepts as its foundation, for us it was like a very bright light bulb, and it was very exciting because it's something that we can do for ourselves, that speaks highly of the things that were interesting for us.
How is that something that we can do for ourselves? And like, what do you mean by that?
As in, when you think, for example, of like quote unquote Hispanic fighters, whether it be boxing, kung fu, taekwondo, whatever it is we're always having to be recognized on other people's platforms. You understand? Like say Canelo, Julio Cesar Chavez, all these other people in sports, combat sports like boxing, that are recognized just in boxing or kung fu. But when we realize about the Xochiyaoyotl, is that this precedes that by hundreds of years, and it's 1,000% us, 1,000% our platform. And if we're already, as a people, if we're already competing and becoming champions in all these other platforms, why don't we take it back and start retaking what's ours, which is the Xochiyaoyotl, the flowery wars, the concept of ritualistic combat, and that is 1,000% our own, and that's why we are super excited to be able to reclaim it.
So is that where you say that Ulama falls into as well?
1,000%, 1,000%, because again, we can be playing basketball. His quote unquote Hispanics are known as like the soccer people, that we love soccer, football. But again, is that if we dig enough, we have our own thing that is valuable, that is worth reclaiming.
Why do you see that importance of reclaiming?
Because besides it reminding us, of who our ancestors were, it gives us the value that we should have had within ourselves all along. Does that make sense? Understanding that there's a multi-millennial sport that was inherited to us, that brought value for thousands of years to our people, and they can still bring value to us and reclaim and give us the value that we need so that we live like fully fulfilled people.
Is this a way of like continuing that, that tradition?
1,000%. You see, I see every new generation as the new people that are going to take the baton. Life is either a walk or a race, and in this case, if you're talking about like the normal procession of human evolution, is just that the older group gives their worn out baton to the new group, and the new group does their progress, does their journey, and gives it to whoever the new group is going to be in the future, and that baton would not have only been worn about, but would have been evolutionized in their own way. But in order for us to continue going forward, we have to remember what we're getting and where it comes from.
So like that baton, changes, and you get the baton that you get is all worn out and stuff
Not necessarily
like that.
worn out,
but
it's just it has been influenced by the previous group.
Well,
because that baton can be forever.
Well, yes,
Mm-hmm.
you see the lived experience,
Right.
in it, and it might not have the same quality as the new
Or color,
as the new
texture.
baton, but as the new generation will do something to make it new
Yes.
again.
To make it theirs.
Yours.
To make it theirs. And that's what we have to remember. You see, this baton that we're receiving, it belonged to someone else. It belonged to a different group of people. And now they're giving us their life. And we have to remember them by this baton, this legacy. The baton is the legacy that they're giving us. We take this so that we live a thorough, fulfilling life, and then it's up to us to give the baton to the next group of people. That has been the cycle of human endeavors.
What do you hope to see? What baton do you hope that yours will look like when you leave it for the next generation?
One that exists. One that doesn't die out, and one that gives an honest history account of the life that we lived, and what it took for us to keep it alive, to keep it existing, so that future generations can be proud, of the ancestors that came before them, and that they continue living the life, however it is that they're gonna live it, but without lies and without limitations, right, of who they are.
Yeah, that without the license limitations, that's something important. Yeah. Something that it has taken me a while is to acknowledge my heritage, like my Mayan heritage, and how great they were with math and numbers and physics and stuff like that.
Freaking nerds. That's what they
I
were.
know. And, I told my friend that, it's like, you're such a nerd. It's like, I know.
Yeah.
I'm proud of it.
Mine's
And
were the freaking nerds.
yes. And be able to acknowledge that and come into that space and be comfortable with it has taken me a long time. But I think that thanks to people like you that keep that baton going, has helped me be able to come into that space of feeling genuine and feeling proud of who I am and my ancestors. What would you hope to tell? What would you tell for someone that might be in that situation where they're looking at themselves in the mirror and trying to figure out, who am I? Those same questions that you asked yourself when you went to see your great grandmother. What would you tell them? What would that reflection tell them back to them?
Right. That's exactly what I would tell them. I would tell them to look in the mirror and look past who they believe they are, and look really in the mirror and really try to gauge who are the people that existed, and the people that fought, and the people that survived for that person, he or she to be living, to be there. What are the stories? What are the values? What are the experiences that hundreds and hundreds of people had to live for that person to be present in that mirror? And when they realize this, they will understand that they carry so much value, so much accumulated value that they didn't even know existed. And when they try to rediscover what all that really means, they're gonna come upon something very magical, and that is that you are here, you are existing, and you add the value to your life based on the will that you have now taken. What is the will that you're giving your life now? And that's gonna give the color and the meaning that person, whatever that person makes it so.
Now, any tips for them to achieve that? Who to seek out exactly? From some practical tips.
Yeah. Number one is start asking questions. Understand what are your questions, and start seeing who can answer them or where can they find answers.